going on. You'd have to think about, because I think the telephone poles are in the way to correct it. So it would be sort of a loopy sidewalk. It's not a perfect solution, which is why maybe looking across the street. But
I think we might want our engineer.
Yes.
Well, that's,
have to see what.
That's exactly where I was going. Let's get some cost estimates, what can be done, how, how financial, much of a burden it is. I mean, what you're talking about logically makes a lot of sense. If we could snap our fingers, it would be a no-brainer. So let's, I suggest if we have a motion to move forward, getting an engineer to look at it, see if we can get some price estimates for either extending the sidewalk about 75 feet or seeing if there's a way to regrade and eliminate the stairs. If that were significantly less money, at least, I mean, is it a perfect solution? No, but I think it will be a significant improvement.
Thank you, appreciate it. Yeah.
Thanks for saying.
Do we have a motion on that?
Would you like to make a motion?
Sure.
Yeah.
I move that we explore the various options to improve pedestrian safety along Thornapple Street at the corner of Brookville.
I will second that. All in favor? Aye.
I would make the point that the reason we have a sidewalk from not all the way down to Brookville, but let's say opposite La Ferme down to our corner is because I worked on that.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
We didn't have it. And the first iteration was this pathetic little blacktop bit that was maybe this wide and lumpy. And you really couldn't roll a stroller down it almost. It was so narrow. But it gave us that. And then over time, I mean, a little more complicated because SHA, the state highway,
Right.
controls that. But that got us at least that far.
How
No,
many years ago was that?
I'm sorry.
When was that?
It's about 40 years ago.
I'm curious.
No, not quite, but almost, yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's, I really appreciate it. And your email was really helpful to get us all thinking. I took a look. Brooke obviously spent some time on that.
Yeah.
So, no, thank you. Any other comments on anything not otherwise on the agenda?
Hey guys, this is Hannah on the phone. I joined a few minutes late, but I caught the tail end of, I think that was Pat,
Yes.
talking about the sidewalk. I think it sounded like on Thornapple and Brookville. And it's
Correct.
so funny, Pat, that you mentioned that, because I wanted to ask about heard you mention a telephone pole, but I'm not sure which one you meant. But I've been wanting to ask about the telephone pole that's on Brookville in between Underwood and Thornapple. And it's like incredibly hard to get past, especially with a stroller. And I don't know if that's the telephone pole that you guys were talking about, but I wonder if that could be part of the investigatory review if we have somebody coming to look at the possibility of relocating that particular pole, because it's very difficult. And obviously Brookville is a really busy road. So it's hard with little kids on scooters or bikes or strollers and whatnot to get past that.
So as I understand what you're saying, Hannah, you're referring to a pole on Brookville, not on.
That's right. Correct.
Okay, that's different. I also think that would involve the state
Shaw, yeah.
because the state highway, SHA, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, we can take a look and.
Because, I mean, Martin's Edition is doing that big sidewalk project, and it's a huge undertaking. Like, it involves closing down the street. And
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, I think we could look at it, but I think it would be a huge project. And if we're going to do one telephone pole on Brookville, I think there's a bigger question about, like, efficiency.
The only reason that one might be arguably able to be treated differently is because it's weird and where it sits. It I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but it sits like right in the middle of the sidewalk, and it's different than any other pole along that line. I'm sure there's probably a reason why it was there, but if somebody's coming to sort of scope out, right around the corner, it might just make sense to have them do a little investigation there.
I don't see any harm in having them take a look as long as they don't include that in the price of what we're talking about on the Thornapple, so we know. And I'm not sure they could unilaterally, I mean, I don't think we could move the pole on our own anyway, but it's certainly worth taking a look. So.
I wasn't aware of what Martin's Additions is doing. Is that coming onto Brookville? They're doing sidewalks and.
on their part, this is a section of the sidewalk on Brookville Road. They're in the next few months going to be,
So the part that's south of the stores?
yes. Mhm.
Oh, hallelujah. How much, how far will that extend? To the village? I mean, to Bradley?
I don't know exactly to where, they have a whole packet. If you go onto their website, you can find it.
It's
Yeah.
easements over small parcels, like along, so it's not going to be consistent, and it changes depending on sort of what the road width is and where they are. And they're also, it's a bigger project even than Brookville, because there are traffic calming measures in the side streets, sort of behind the markets, and some other things. But yes, it is on their website
To get a curve that's more than 2 inches. Be good.
but you can, and they have aerial maps that you can take a look at where they're putting them.
All right, any other comments before we move to the next item on the agenda? Going once, twice. Okay. Updates potentially to the building code. As we've discussed previously, currently our code in terms of height restrictions, setbacks, et cetera, is simply, we don't have separate rules, it's just the county rules. And so we were looking into possibly putting in, either tracking the county for the most part, as well as possibly some other stuff. Steve, do you want to start the conversation as you've been looking at a number of properties?
Right, so that's a good summation of where the section stands today, because we have much in the way of regulations on buildings. It relies on the county regulations or setbacks for height. But in terms of has the impact been to date on Section 5, the very modest survey that I did looking at houses, and a few times I've been going through the roads of Section 5, it seems like the houses in Section 5 are well within the county standards. They're modest houses. They're not pushing the vertical limit. They are perhaps pushing the side setbacks because of historic, they were built before the codes were put in place. Some of these houses. I also find that many of the Section 5 lots are narrower and deeper than lots in Somerset, the other municipality that I really work with. So it's just, there's a slightly different topography that builders and homeowners are working with. So I think that the question or a question for the council to consider is if the current housing in Section 5 establishes a character for the section, and it is a character that the residents want to maintain, I think it makes sense to consider adopting some regulations to protect it, as opposed to waiting until some houses start to push the limits.
No, we appreciate that. And we do have a proposal that for the most part tracks the current county rules. Can you remind me, or someone can remind me of any differences in the current proposal? I thought there may be one or two if I recall my conversation, but
There was a look at the size setbacks. So right now, because most of the houses in the section are pre-1954, I think that's the year, they're allowed to have 7-foot setbacks, and that lot is allowed to have 7-foot setbacks forever because of that date. When that lot was recorded in the land records. If I believe that the regulation, or something that's been talked about at least, would be to move towards establishing an 8-foot side setback, and then obviously the houses that are already built don't have to change. But if someone were to tear down the house, as opposed to just say it's creating an addition, if they were to tear it down, then the new house would have to comply with the new setback requirements.
if they But correct me if I'm wrong, and I think this is what you're saying, if there's something that was less than the 8-foot setback right now, and they said, we want to not tear down the house, but tear down that part and rebuild it, would they then still be grandfathered in if it was just like a porch or something? Or would they have to come to us for a variance?
I think Ron would probably best be able to answer that. I think it depends on the exact language you use. Perhaps one example we're getting at, I know in Somerset, there are some older houses that don't comply with the 8-foot setback. And it's explicit in the code that if they want to, say, extend rearward and build an enclosed patio, and that enclosed patio is then obviously is going to also violate that 8-foot setback, that is okay. You do not even need a
I put my
variance.
recycling out.
Is that true? Is that only true if it's in the same footprint, or is it just
Did
if
you
they're,
want
or
me
is
to
it just if
help
they're
us on
already
recycling?
closer than 8 feet of a setback, they can do something else that's also within 8 feet?
Okay, I'm coming up for
It's
Fine.
ladder,
That's what I
so
thought. Okay.
Ladder, yeah, as the draft is currently worded, proposed section 9-165 entitled Development Nonconformities would say a developmental nonconformity, that's something that was lawful when built, but rendered nonconforming by a change in the code later. Those things are allowed to be maintained, altered, repaired, and in your example, Greg, a portion of the wall could be torn down and rebuilt within the same footprint. So that the exact language used is that modification can't be enlarged beyond the 3-dimensional dimensions that existed as of the date the ordinance is adopted. But if you wanted to redo that addition within the same footprint, within the same 3-dimensional boundaries, you could do so. But if it encroached any farther into a required setback, a variance would be required. But again, as Steve said, you can make it say whatever you want.
As it's written right now, Ron, what if you're not replacing like with like? So, what if you have a screened porch and you want to enclose that porch? So you'd be installing different materials. You could do that as long as you are in the same footprint. But say you wanted
So
to
that's
that's correct or no?
So currently under county law, if you have a open screen porch that encroaches into a required setback, you cannot convert it into an addition in an enclosed space, because open porches are allowed to encroach into setbacks a certain dimension depending on which setback you're talking about, front, rear, side. But when you convert it into enclosed space, you lose that exemption. So a variance probably would be required in that situation. So that's something that you could, as a council, do something different in your local code. The county code would apply at the same time, but with respect to your village code, you could allow open porches to be enclosed.
But would it then have no effect because the county wouldn't allow you to do it? You wouldn't be able to get your county permit?
Probably if you had the exact same setback. A lot of municipalities have, for example, an 8-foot required side setback instead of 7. So in that instance, there's 1 foot where it's possible that a county variance wouldn't be required, because if that porch was extending only 7 feet towards the side, no county variance would be required, but a 1 foot municipal variance would be required.
But Brooks, right, that even if it was within we set a 7-foot setback for us, so it was within that, and even if we gave the variance, the county would still have to give a variance, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm saying if your setback is 8 feet,
Right.
and the county's is 7, and they meet the 7, then they don't need the county variance.
Because it's grandfathered on the old plat by the county.
No, it's not even grandfather,
But it's the recorded plat 7 foot at the county level too.
Correct, yeah, so yeah, at the county level, if your lot is platted before 1954, you get a 7-foot setback from the side.
Do people have comments, questions? Obviously, I mean, we can introduce this tonight. We would not be approving it tonight. We'd do that at our next meeting. But obviously, if people have thoughts, comments, questions.
And I'll just point out, Greg, that there are some blanks in the ordinance that are flagged for discussion purposes. You know, Steve covered height as proposed. The height would be the same as the county's, although we would also have a height limit for accessory buildings. But there is a blank in a possible building coverage requirement. So that's sort of an open question that's going to require some council discussion.
And that's 160 B.
Correct.
What is the setback for accessory dwellings or sheds or garages?
Yeah, so great question. And you're asking not what's the requirement at the county, but what's would be proposed for the village?
Correct, yeah. What are we proposing here?
Okay. So that is section 9. Whoops.
I think it's 113B is accessories, right?
Correct, yes. So the side and rear would be proposed at 5 feet, which is the same as the county, and setback 60 feet from the front, which is the same as the county. But then this draft proposes something a little different than what the county does. If the accessory building has a certain height, if it's greater than 12 feet, or if it's wider than 24 feet, then increased setbacks apply. And what's proposed here is that an increase of 2 feet for the setback would be required for every 1 foot that exceeds 12 feet in height or 24 feet in length. The county requires 1 foot of extra setback for every 1 foot over 15 feet. So the proposal is a little stricter there.
And Ron, a clarification, is it actually, I thought it was 12 feet for a flat roof and 15 feet for a pointed roof. Am I not reading that correctly? The ridge?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So that, to me, that's a significant difference because you're looking
Yes.
at
15 feet.
15 feet versus 12 feet.
Richard?
I just suggest that the issue that seems to bother people the most, at least over the years, is height. And particularly if you look at some of the stuff that's gone on in Section 3, you'll see areas where very tall houses have been allowed and it's created not only site problems, but problems with the neighborhood. So if you're considering taking side setbacks and making them wider, what you're doing then is you're, I guess, narrower, so you have to be 8 feet away instead of 7. I think it would be a mistake to give back that space and height. In other words, if you say, okay, well, you have to be 8 feet away, but we're going to give you an extra couple of feet above in order to make up for the fact that the side setback is bigger. I think you ought to be careful with this.
Am I missing? Are we doing that though? Or?
I let me tell you, I sort of looked through this stuff, but I didn't. It's not. I'm not on the clock anymore, so I read all. But all I'm just saying is that there's a long discussion about side setback that I've been hearing here, and I think that side setbacks have been less of an issue height in between Section 5 and Section 3. And I can tell you from my own experience, somebody built a very tall house in our backyard, basically. It looks like somebody parked a big ocean liner back there. And Section 3 allowed it.
Do we know if it's over 35 feet? I
We
assume it's-
hired a lawyer, they looked at it and it was okay. I don't know what the number.
I think to your point though, I mean, can we talk about height? Like that would
Sure.
be one change that I would potentially suggest that I think other people have maybe are in the same place, but other municipalities, their local regulations by that chart, you can see are 33 for the max and 28 feet for the mean. And so again, just to give it some perspective, if you're thinking a 10-foot ceiling height on your first level, a foot in between, you could have another 10 foot, and then an 8 foot, and you're still allowed to do that under this height. And I think Steve and I were talking, I think not just maybe changing, going from, as it was drafted, 35 and 30, but also changing the or to and, is that would be, which would also, and Steve, could you talk about that a little bit about it more?
And just so everyone, if you have a draft.
Oh,
it's
sorry, page
9-1
5.
Yeah, 9-112A.
Yes.
Thank you, Brooke. The county regulation for height, it's an or. So the homeowners and contractors just have to satisfy either a peak height or an average height, which would allow them to have a very flat roof that goes up very high towards that peak. Several municipalities, doesn't indicate on this table, but several municipalities, including Somerset, but I know some others have made that an and. So they have to satisfy both the peak and the mean or average height, and that forces the design to be more of a triangular peak shape, which could be considered aesthetically more pleasing, less wacky
For me to
on the
talk.
visual horizon.
And Brooke, yeah.
And then just while we're talking roofs, and I gave Rachel this piece of paper here, that so she can put it up on the screen so the folks in the Zoom. All right, Rachel. And I printed out, here's Emily and Pat, and one thing that let's go, and I gave one too. I just thought one other thing related to, or let me actually back up. I think just one more question. If you look at what Steve surveyed, I think, Richard, you bring up a really good point that what the differences in height, our heights as a section are fairly modest, and would stay under a 33 and 28 cap. But when I was reviewing the building codes and ordinances in the local municipalities around us, I thought one interesting thing that was worth discussing that the Village of Martin's Additions does is they have a prohibition on flat roofs in the section on the front of the main roof. So you would still be allowed, you can see by those bottom pictures, you could have a flat roof on your side porch, a flat roof on your portico, a flat roof on your back addition or front porch. But what we're talking about would be sort of eliminating the pictures on the top row with the red X, where that flat roof on the main part of the building, and it seems to me that those feel a lot bigger than the surrounding houses that you can see in the picture. And I don't believe that we have a current flat roof in the section. Like, so it would seem you'd be, most of our roofs are what you think of when you think of regular roof. I think that I'm a little nervous about being too prescriptive with the building code, and this is people's private property, and telling them what they can and can't build. But the last picture that is actually an addition that's going on right now in Fairfax County, which is totally legal by their,
It's the upper right one.
the
right?
upper, yeah, the one that's under construction. And I think that that's tricky because that resident is putting up something that is completely legal, but it's obviously the resident next door. It's pretty massive over their house. And so I think it would be, to Steve's point, worth considering getting ahead of some of these issues as opposed to waiting for them to arrive. So I offer that.
Brooke or Steve, what is Martin's Additions height requirements? I know it's on the other.
So they reduced the county standard by 2
I think they're
feet.
33 and 28. I don't know about the and or.
Yeah, that's,
It's my understanding that they
definitely
both apply in Martin's Additions. You don't get to choose. You have to comply with both.
Okay.
There is
So
an
would-
exception in Martin's Additions for established building height. So if on your street
Yes.
there already is an established building height of your neighbors of 35, then you can still have the 35. but otherwise, it's like 2 feet.
It's the same in Somerset. If, I believe my perception of how things unfolded in Somerset is there was one particular house that was built that caused a lot of consternation within the community. This was a very tall, modern, flat roof, blocky house. That not only, so the top roof just met the county standard, roughly 35 feet. And then it had another like 8-foot tall elevator or stairwell access, big block on top. It's a very large structure. One of the things Somerset adopted is an inclusion of any type of structure above the roof in the calculation of the height. So your chimneys count towards the height. An elevator shaft would count towards the height. All these things count. Just again to try and control the height.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think where we land, we're at the beginning of this conversation, but height to me feels to be the more significant factor in terms of getting along with your neighbors and keeping the modest size of the current houses. And I think to Steve's earlier point, we have a lot of houses in the side setback, so I'm less concerned about that. I think my concerns on side setbacks are actually more, and my question for you, Steve, would be if there's a stormwater management issue when you go closer to the property. So it's not so much a character or what the houses look like, but if you're getting, and my understanding is, and maybe this is a question for Ron, but you could be, if your lot was recorded before 1930 or 1928, you could even be 5 feet away, depending on how wide your lot is. So that we could have some situations in our section where I think the lots are narrower and deeper, as you suggested. I don't know if you have any, intel on that, or.
No, I don't have any data on that characterization. Fortunately, though, the lots are deep, so in general, there seems to be space for stormwater management techniques, whether they be dry wells or rain gardens in the rear of the house projects I've looked at.
I don't know if you have any 1930s lots either.
I think we're 28.
We're 35.
29.
Our house is 5.
And so the draft currently has a proposed side setback of 8 feet. I think I'm hearing Steve suggesting we keep it at 7. Is that right, Steve?
Wasn't I was suggesting even a 7, but I think the character of the town has many houses that are on the order of 7-foot setback.
And the problem I have with that is that the houses that are being built now, unless there's a fairly severe or conservative massing limit, are going to be bigger than the houses that were built 70 years ago. And so your 7-foot setback might have been for a house that had, three bedrooms, 1 bath, a living room, dining room, and kitchen, which is what our house, had, and the neighbors and so on. When you allow that 7-foot setback to continue, but now the house next door or whoever has 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, and the bulk of that house, the mass of that house is going to be considerably more. And so I think the massing has to be a feature or a limit. There's a house, I don't know how this compares to anything except it's so extraordinarily hideous, but on Spring Street in Section 3, there's a house that was built, and it's just a massive house on a tiny, oddly shaped lot. And apparently it has a very odd roof line, which is, it looks like it's going to go up to a peak, but then it's cut off. And so the look of it is very, it's really sort of overwhelming, not attractive at all, but it's very large. And presumably they met requirements of the county if Section 3 I don't know if they had their own at the time, but they exceeded the height or they did something, so they had to cut the roof, which is why the roof is flat until you get to these, slanted areas on the side. So it didn't get built the way it was intended because it would not have met the restrictions. But I think people are looking, people who are building are going to look for every square foot they can get. And the house next door was originally exactly the same as our house. Greg's house pretty much is the same, was doubled in size. So that setback of 7 feet, which is legit, suddenly has a huge impact on us because it's not just front of the house, it's the whole back of the house as well. And I actually called the architect to sort of yell at the architect when I saw what was happening and said, this house is so close to us and there's now zero privacy and what have you, kitchen windows looking at each other, the entryway and so on. And he said, well, meets all the restrictions. So that's my concern about the 7 foot, because I think nobody's interested anymore really in retaining the, the look of, if a developer gets a hold of a house, they're not interested in retaining the character of the neighborhood. If one of us want to expand, or renovate our house, we might be more in tune with that, I don't know. But I think you have to assume that people are going to try to take advantage of every square inch they can and what that's going to look like.
And I think I'll finish my statement, let other folks talk. I'm okay with the 8, but I guess I noticed that there wasn't the, one thing we didn't talk about was the 18 total that the county has, and that I don't see as necessary, because what the county says is it's minimum of 8 for a total of 18, and that I don't feel as strongly as I do about height.
I'm just wondering on the height issue, if we, and I'm spitballing here, if on 912A we switched it from or to and, I guess I would take off the greater of as well, but kept them 35 and 30, but if that included every piece of the house, and then we also put in a flat roof prohibition, I'm wondering if that would both give people a little flexibility without allowing the monstrosities to be built or something so out of character. And if we're including things like chimneys and stuff, I think we would want to have a little bit, make sure we're not capping it too low.
I think that's an example of a modest proposal that would start to constrain the vertical development of new houses.
I guess my only question on 35 is you're talking 12-foot ceiling, how do you get to 35 as a house? It's a pretty large home that's a sort of different in what you're looking at a 12-foot ceiling and another 12-foot ceiling, a foot in between is at 25, so you still have 10 feet to play with as an attic. And a chimney. It is a pretty large structure.
You have 35 feet, it's a big house.
I'm just trying to think how much of a difference is 35 versus 33, is it?
Well, if you look at the existing survey, none of them measure above 32.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, one comes in at 34.
I'm not fixed on anything here. I'm certainly.
And it seems to me like there's an important balance to strike. I agree totally with what Pat's saying about making every effort to preserve the way the neighborhood looks, and I fully support the prohibition of flat roof, especially in the examples that you've shown, Brooke, but flexibility and striking the right balance here, it seems like. Right.
Yeah, if we're talking about just flexibility and balance, I guess something going back to what we were talking about, I think my intention would be to try to get people to save current houses. And so even if I do want to allow people some flexibility to modernize, which I think is probably better than a tear down. So I do think, and maybe it could be taken care of through a variance. I'm questioning sort of what the appetite of going through that process is for smaller changes. So, say you want to put steps out of your screen porch, that would be prohibited. You know, or you want to extend back 3 feet on a porch to make it bigger for your family. Like I want to strike a balance where we're allowing people to grow with their homes and but being realistic about what people are considering, an appropriate modern addition. So I don't know if that would be, like, one proposal would be some sort of language maybe I'm on page 7. I'm Ron, I defer to you, but like exceptions for certain projections and appurtenances, there are other, Ron, can you speak to language in other municipalities about sort of grandfathering in current properties? I think there is some language in some of the other sections. Would it be worth considering or no?
Yeah, sure. So it is common to address nonconformities. Generally speaking, with respect to building regulations and zoning codes, nonconformities are meant to go away over time in favor of the new regime, because there's generally a public policy supporting the new regulations. That said, it's obviously unfair to tell people you must move your house to comply with the new code. That could never be done. I'm sorry, was there a comment or question?
I just said, are you okay?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to have to get some water in a second after I finish this answer. So, the general rule with nonconformities is they're allowed to be maintained, repaired, but if you tear them down, the rebuild should comply with the law. One second, let me grab some water.
Sure, and I mean, this is 9165 that seeks to address the nonconformity issue. And then and Steve, I don't know if you want to start on also the 9160B issue on lot coverage, which is the blank.
Well, can I ask a question before we do that? Of course. So Steve, I'd be interested in I realize you may not be prepared for this question, but your experience in Somerset with non-conforming teardowns. What is the rule there? Remind me on height as it relates to what's currently grandfathered.
For tear downs, they have to meet the new codes. They are meeting the new height standard.
Have they run into any issues whereby folks are looking for their 2 feet back or whatever?
Yes, some modest changes. There was one house that, just because of delays in their application process, by the time they actually applied, it was after the new code was adopted. So then their drawings were showing that their house was too tall, so they had to modify their design. And one house that has been built now is in some false stones in the construction process. I would characterize its peak as sort of a funny shape that I think that they sort of angled and cut it a bit to keep it within the height standard. But that's okay. It does, from the street, as you look at it, it is not as bulky as it would otherwise. It still occupies a lot of the lot, though. Within code, which for a tear down infill development, it's like 28 to 30%.
30, I think.
Depending on the lot size. But the real point, well, it's serious, is developers generally push to the limit on how close they come to the code. So the house I'm talking about, the Wallstone, the plans have its height 0.1 foot within tolerance, so 1.2 inches shy of the maximum height. And we are required that they do a height check to verify that they are actually delivering the house within specifications. It's interesting. We're I live in Somerset, so I think of Somerset as really, Somerset is looking at lot coverage as a potential area to regulate moving forward. And they're looking at section 5, in part because you have the front lot, non-vegetative coverage restriction. Right now, Somerset has nothing, it's just what the county has, that's.
One thing, having heard that, and this is maybe just a table setting or a reminder, but we've heard it here today and online tonight. You know, I think the important context for us to remember is, as we've gone through this last 18 months, whatever it's been, on the county and state housing issue, there have been a lot of concerns raised by a lot of different people, dozens and dozens of Section 5 residents, height being chief among their concerns. I think that's important for us to remember, particularly within the context of a developer's pushing for every inch and perhaps coming up with strange shapes to do so. Which, you know, again, you know, I keep going back to the idea that, you know, I think we need to figure out a way to be flexible and find a way to let people do what they need to do with their properties, but it comes down to 35 versus 33. That would be in keeping with what I take to be the overwhelming will of our residents.
Ask one question here, maybe in the papers, which I didn't read, but the definition of a tear down. Over the course of years, the word on the street was that somebody could beat the definition of tear down by leaving a piece of wall up from the old house and building around it, or even more ridiculous, to have the chimney from the old house there and build around it. But if somebody comes in and says, we're going to tear down, only leave the front wall, and now I'm going to take advantage for all the authorities that rules for a small, older company.
Right. Great question. The code, county code for R60 zoning talks about that. It defines what are the limits of construction activity that designate the effort as infill development versus just an addition. You're adding on a 2-story rear porch, rear patio. Now, tell me how, I can't remember the exact details, but it's along the lines of, if the addition is less than 50% of the footprint of the existing house, then that's an addition. If it's more than 50%, you're now talking about infill development. And infill development triggers more restrictive rules on lot coverage. That's it. It's just on one.
I have the DPS document.
But am I correct this is draft?
That's the one.
If someone tore everything down, save a chimney, they still would be subjected to all the new rules.
Yes, if that's it.
Yeah.
But we
And
have
the town would not be bound to the county approach as to defining what's new construction versus addition.
Oh, right. For those Section 55, you could define as separately.
Yes, the resident's quite right. The county rule used to be, if you keep up 2 exterior walls, it's deemed an addition, and so developers would just prop up walls with 2x4s.
But that's no longer the case, Ron?
Yeah, there's a new rule now applied by the county, as Steve noted. Obviously, developers wanted to avoid new construction because you got to put in sprinkler system, and you are subject to stricter infill development rules for the new construction. I think that changed in 2014.
Just for residents who are listening in, from the county's R60 code, a project is considered infill development if it is a new detached house, or demolition is more than 50% of the existing floor area of all floors of the dwelling, or addition is more than 50% of the existing floor area of all floors of the dwelling.
So I think the final issue, at least on this, maybe the final issue I want to at least raise, and Ron and Steve chime in, is 160B, which we mentioned briefly earlier about building and surface coverage, which we've currently left blank as to what it should not exceed. One of you want to give a little?
Sure. So the county has a building coverage requirement that only applies to buildings. Some other jurisdictions have a non-vegetative surface coverage requirement, as you do currently for front yards. And then this proposal, put in just for discussion purposes, would be a third type, which would be a total coverage. Anything that's covering the grass. And that's put in for discussion purposes, given mostly that with density being possibly increased with changes to county zoning and workforce housing, for example, where a triplex could require 5 on-site parking spaces. And given that the county stormwater drainage system seems largely overwhelmed, stormwater drainage issues on the rise everywhere, it might be something that the council wants to consider a total coverage requirement. Or you could do nothing, or just do what the county does with respect to buildings, or impervious surface coverage, which would be another option, which would say anything that's impervious we're going to count, but if you do your patio or driveway with pervious pavers, we won't count those surfaces. That's a more complicated decision, and that's why this is left with blanks, because it's not something that's easily measured now, and because there are so many options, I didn't really want to recommend one, but rather leave that to your discussion.
Ron, on this front, why wouldn't you want to go with the county rule?
So the county rule is just buildings, and sometimes communities find that that's not enough to preserve open space, light and air between buildings, green, and address stormwater drainage concerns, because it's, it doesn't include driveways, it doesn't include parking pads, patios, and the like, all of the, the hardscape on a lot.
Do any of your municipalities have a provision like 160B, and if so, what is the percentage?
No, none of my other clients have this. This would be a new concept. There are some that do non-vegetative surface coverage in the front yard, like Town of Chevy Chase, Martin's Additions. But and Somerset's looking at lot coverage, as Steve noted. But yeah, no one's considered a total building and surface coverage requirement yet.
And that I would take even further. I couldn't looking, Ron, like anywhere other than directly in the conservation areas within 1,000 feet of the Chesapeake. Do you know of any other municipality, not ones that you represent, but just generally anybody that does something like this?
I've not researched that, no, so I can't answer that. I don't know currently. I don't know if there is anyone. I'd have to research that.
I guess I understand the intent of it, and I think with parking coming down the road, I think another question I had is, would turf, because I think some people like to install artificial turf in lieu of grass, so I assume that would be counted as an impervious surface. Ron, is that correct?
It depends on the turf.
Okay.
Some turf is impervious, some is pervious, I believe.
But and so those sorts of things in sport courts, you're getting to a point where you could have a lot that has a lot of impervious coverage on it. And I think, Rachel, when you have seen in building permits, sometimes a patio can make the difference between a neighbor flooding another neighbor. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, that, the stormwater, also how close, like, what the setbacks are, I think that's where we're getting, like, in terms of stormwater, I think that makes a difference, how close these structures are. So that's where I think setbacks are important to be mindful of. And the height. So I think from what I hear from residents, I think stormwater is one of the perennial, like, significant issues. I think the question is instituting an impervious coverage requirement going to be, or non-vegetative coverage requirement, the way to do it?
And I guess I just feel like, well, I just don't know what it would be. It's hard for me to feel like I'm doing anything but like throwing a dart at a level right now without more data about how much people's lots are currently covered, what other section, if there, no one else has tried this before, it does make me a little nervous to just throw a number out there and hope that it works. But I like the idea of trying to deal with the stormwater issue that Rachel, spends a lot of time, and I'm sure Steve, hearing from residents on.
I guess one of my questions would be do we think the maximum right now of properties in section 5 of coverage that they have? I mean, I don't want to put a number that would really be inhibiting if we were to put a number in, but if we were keeping the character, I don't know what that number would be.
I would not be surprised if it approaches 70% for some houses and lots. If they're between walkways in the front and then driveway, the garage and parking, and maybe an extra parking spot plus the parking area in front of the garage, and maybe they have a patio.
Uh-huh. I mean, if we said it was 70%, which would include every piece of property in section 5 currently, I mean, I would feel comfortable with that. Yeah, I mean, is it worth doing a little more poking around on that question?
Do you think you can arrive to some?
I could try. What I've seen in the available information that I worked on to develop this table, there's less hard data. I would have to try and measure off of the drawings, and it's really hard to try to measure curved walkways and how much square footage they have.
I mean, even just a sort of crude number, I mean, I want to sort of err on the high side here, but